Okay, let us get back to it. So, Tim, I already was showing you how uh, different strategies can be used toward the center. I'm sorry if I'm losing you with going really fast. I thought I would just want to look at some basic e4, e5 openings and show how the fight for the center works. So, the most common opening in chess is e4, e5, and then knight f3, which you can see that the knight has a lot of different ways it can move. And so if you look at all the different ways a knight can move, it's obviously going to be most effective in the center of the board, right? So if you look at this kind of octopus knight, let's say that black makes some kind of a nonsense move like bishop e7. This is a total nonsense move, and then I think it's pretty obvious that uh, white is going to just take it. Now, if you look at all the different places that the knight can go, right, you can see that domination of the center of the board has a lot to do with the fact that the closer you are to the center of the board, particularly for a piece like a knight, the more control over the board you have. I mean, just look at all the different squares that the knight can hit. And when you look at that, when you look at it that way, when you look at all of the different ways, you can see, right, that by controlling the high ground, you can really try to restrict the movements of enemy pieces, right? But more importantly, right, when we see how the fight for the center goes, it's understood that in spite of all the different ways the knight can go, the real places it's looking at are these two squares here, right? That's where it's particularly looking, in this case, really threatening that e5 pawn. So the natural response by black is going to be knight to c6. Now this is the most common opening in chess, and it provokes a lot of the other more common openings that follow it. So I've got those moves, the most common opening moves, shown for you in terms of where they're going. So we'll start out with the simplest one, which is the three knights opening. And as you see, it's just developing another knight, attacking the central squares, right? That's pretty simple. Usually you just respond to that with just playing your knight out as well. Nothing complicated. That opening's not very ambitious. The most popular opening at the master level is bishop to b5. I'm going to look at that one last. I already showed you how you can play d4. This is the Scotch game. It's similar to the center game, and very much similar to the center game. I believe the best way to proceed is after the pawn takes to actually give up another pawn in order to try to get this faster development. This is called the Gehring Gambit, by the way, and it's really, really, really strong, especially if you can get your opponent to get greedy. So if he takes it, which you hope him to do, then you can play bishop to c4. And after you play bishop to c4, black really should not take this pawn. If black does take this pawn, he's up 2 pawns, yes, but he's also down a heck of a lot of development. I mean, if you look at all of the different ways in which white is, attacking the center of the board, and the fact that his pieces have such fast development, the computer actually measures this position as about even though black is 2 pawns up. And so what that shows is that white has a lot of compensation. What that means is, even though he's down 2 pawns, the freedom, the mobility, and the way in which he can create immediate threats is at least worth the 2 pawns that white has given up. Now, more typically, though, if we're going to look at a more typical opening, is to move the king's bishop right away. So if you move the king's bishop right away, so let's say it goes to c4. This is the Italian game. This is one of the oldest openings in chess. We see it attacks the center square here, but it also attacks f7, which is the weakest spot on the board early in the game because it's only defended by the king. That's its only defensive. That's in fact one of the more early openings is if you play the knight out, and the knight basically it unprotects this square g5 because the knight's now in the way between the queen and that square. The queen is no longer hitting this square because of the knight. So what often happens is they just attack f7 right away. Now, this is not a foolproof attack because there are ways of countering it. Excuse me, that was not the right move. Because if black plays d5 and then takes the pawn and then threatens the bishop here, then black is just fine. But just saying that this is how some of this stuff works. But as you can see, right, still we're looking at developing and attacking the center of the board and pressuring the center of the board with our opening moves, right? That's still how the fight for the center is basically working. But the most popular move for masters is actually bishop to b5. This is the Spanish game, or the Ruy Lopez. And this may not seem like it's pressuring the center, because if you were looking to pressure the center squares, this diagonal, you would think that the bishop would go here to c4. But what the bishop is doing is he's indirectly pressuring this e5 pawn. He's indirectly pressuring this e5 pawn because he's attacking the knight on c6 that defends the e5 pawn. And when you see it that way, you see that this is actually kind of an indirect way, because, as we know, the knight is attacking the pawn, and this knight, of course, in return is defending this pawn, right? We know that that's what he's doing. And so when the bishop is attacking this knight, it's in order to try to cancel out this defense on the pawn. Like, that's the goal, is to eliminate it. So if you look at the main line, right, a6, white actually has a choice to try to eliminate the defense of this pawn by capturing. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't win the pawn. It doesn't win the pawn because after this capture, this pawn is not hanging. Because if knight takes the pawn, that seems logical, the queen is able to go to d4 and simultaneously attacks or forks both the knight and the e5 pawn. And so the knight has to go back, and then black gets the pawn back. And black is actually slightly better here, even though he has doubled pawns, and that's a weakness. But black is slightly better here because he has much, much faster development than white. And he can also take away white's ability to castle immediately by forcing the queen trade and forcing the king away from the back rank. So all of these early openings, right, all of them are dedicated around this idea of trying to work at the center and trying to get your pieces out. So I hope this video hasn't been too cumbersome. I hope that you can understand it a little bit and try to understand like the way chess works. And I'm hoping that I can make more videos that are useful for you in the future. So I will end this particular video series, this kind of opening lecture, and I will see you soon.